Let's build Storm in Baldur's Gate 3. As a child, Storm was orphaned and taken in by a gang of thieves. It was from this gang of thieves that she would learn the arts of stealth and sleight of hand. This leads us perfectly to the Urchin character background for proficiency in stealth and sleight of hand rolls. As far as race goes, there are a few options that might grant you an optimal set of skills or passive bonuses, but honestly, I personally usually pick whatever race I feel like based on the theme of the build I'm making or just how I want the character to look usually. If you are interested in min-maxing your race choice, I recommend you come here to the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki and check out this table. I will leave a link to this in the video description. You can come here, you can see what each race and sub-race choice will give you if you choose that. Some of them are really important. You can get armor and weapon proficiencies that you wouldn't normally have with a certain class or whatever, and make a character that wouldn't otherwise be possible, or at least save yourself from having to take feats later on to get those proficiencies. After a few years of this thieving lifestyle, Storm's weather powers manifested, and she began using them to help the local people survive in the harsh, unforgiving Sahara desert, though it wouldn't be until after she joined the X-Men that she would learn the true extent of her powers. These powers generally fall under the umbrella of atmokinesis, meaning control over all the forces that make up weather itself. This isn't just talking about rain and lightning, ladies and gents. She can control atmospheric pressure, humidity, oxygen concentration, all different kinds of things. Through precise manipulation of these various weather factors, Storm can summon and create all manner of weather events, regardless of her current location. She can easily create rain and sleet indoors, and is capable of dropping the air temperature so rapidly that it will basically flash freeze anyone who happens to be caught in the area. Here she can be seen using a precisely controlled blast of wind to blow all of the trash and debris out of a massive building, immediately after which she summons a flood to wash the building clean without damaging the foundation or the building itself. Her control of wind currents and air pressure allows her to fly herself and others at jet speeds, as well as easily lifting and flinging nearby objects at blistering speeds. So it's pretty easy to imagine a situation where you could see Storm just hanging back on the back line of a fight, just busting up giant chunks of asphalt and concrete and flinging them like an artillery cannon, raining hell down on her enemies. Now, does she need to do that when she can channel and summon electricity through her own body and freaking lightning bolts and summon a blizzard and a tornado? No, she doesn't, but, you know, busting up and flinging chunks of the earth at people is also cool, and I would probably do it even if I didn't have to. If you can do that, you do it at least once or twice, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, while we're talking about being able to generate and call in lightning storms and stuff like that, that's also pretty cool. So let's talk about that a little bit. She has such precise control. She can be seen here sniping a freaking lightning bolt through a tiny pinhole in this force field, precisely blasting exactly where she needed it to be. Here's one of those giant AoE lightning attacks I was talking about, striking down a huge, massive area. This is like maybe an ultimate attack that you would see in a video game or something like that. Whenever you see her doing a freaking thunderstorm that's like 2 miles wide, it's usually never just a thunderstorm. You'll also have maelstroms getting kicked up if they're near water, tornadoes getting kicked up, freaking whatever, a blizzard, hurricanes, something else, and lightning storms. All kinds of stuff will be happening at the same time, which is also pretty neat. We're going to look at a few more examples of Storm's ridiculous feats here in a second, but for now, let's start building this character. Right out of the gate, we're going to choose Storm Sorcerer for obvious and understandable reasons, and you're going to understand those reasons even better here shortly. As soon as you choose this subclass, you will get the Tempestuous Magic ability. From this point forward, whenever you cast a spell, which is level 1 or higher, you can use your bonus action to fly up to 30 feet without provoking opportunity attacks. This fits extremely well with the theme of Storm, obviously as a character who can fly, and it's going to allow you an insane level of mobility for your entire playthrough. This is a really, really strong thing to have, especially this early on in the game. Ray of Frost and Shocking Grasp are both easy choices for cantrips, but don't rule out a few of the others either. Storm is capable of gathering contaminants in the air and producing a localized cloud of poison or acid rain, so acid and poison spells are not entirely off the table. She can also lower the humidity in an area, making everything extremely dry while also increasing the concentration of oxygen in that same area. This essentially creates a freaking giant bomb just waiting for a spark to set it off. And I don't think I have to tell you, creating a spark is something she's pretty freaking good at. So if you feel the need to pick up a fire spell at some point along the way, you have justification for doing that as well. Storm can very easily start a fire. Now, is she throwing fireballs? Probably not most of the time. Is there an instance where she did? I couldn't find one. I didn't look super hard, but if there is, let me know because I want to see it. I think that's badass. But anyway, like I said, if you feel the need to take a poison, acid, or fire spell, you don't have to justify it. You've got justification right here. She can do those things. For these reasons, Chromatic Orb ends up being a very good option for a level 1 spell because you can choose one of various elements depending on the needs of your current situation. Ice Knife is another strong choice that fits thematically. Obviously, being able to blast a chunk of ice across the room and have it explode, something that Storm could easily pull off. No questions asked. Thunder Wave is a great tool for repositioning enemies or even knocking them straight off of cliffs, so don't hesitate to blast some jokers with this one. Fog Cloud is an excellent area denial or stealth tool, and there's various instances of this in the comics, with Storm using giant fog clouds to have her team sneak into areas, prevent them from being seen when they're escaping from somewhere, whatever. There's actually one version. She puts a wall of fog in the room and then ionizes the fog so where it's electrically charged, and you can actually do that in Baldur's Gate 3. If you electrify a pool of water on the ground and then hit it with a fire spell so it turns into steam, it'll turn into electrified steam that does damage to people as they're walking through it, and that's straight up something that Storm has done in the comics. Featherfall makes sense as an option if you want to take it, and the spell Shield can easily be justified by just looking at this panel. This is a freaking panel of Cyclops attempting to blast Storm with this big old one-eyed beam shooter, but she's not about to deal with that nonsense, so she strikes the eye blast with a bolt of lightning, driving it into the ground right before it hits her. That's friggin' crazy, but there's multiple instances in the comics of Storm using lightning to shield herself in this way. Shield is an awesome spell, and it makes sense for Storm to have it. As you continue leveling your Sorcerer, you're gonna have various meta magic options from which to choose. These are honestly up to personal preference. I usually end up taking Twin Spell, Distant Spell, Heighten Spell, and Quicken Spell, but an argument can easily be made for any of the others, and you should choose what you think sounds cool. Any of them fit properly in the Storm build as well. Any of them could be justified, no problem. At second level, you will choose another spell that fits with the Storm theme, and then we're going to move on. For the record, by the way, here's a panel of Storm removing the air from a dude's lungs, forcing him to answer her questions before he would be allowed to breathe again. So, the sleep spell is definitely on the menu as well if you want it. Her control over her powers is so absurdly good, she could definitely leave your brain with just enough oxygen to avoid permanent damage, while also forcing you to remain unconscious. At third level, you will unlock your level 2 spells, and as you might imagine, a bunch of these fit thematically as well. Shatter is basically a localized sonic boom, which Storm could easily pull off. off. And right here, you can see a panel where she is compressing electricity until it becomes superheated plasma, and she's able to fire that plasma off as an attack. So, Scorching Ray is not entirely out of the question if you really want it. But if you're trying to stick to the lightning, cold, thunder, wind, the actual weather related stuff, then I completely understand and I don't blame you a single bit. That's what I did too. I'm just saying, if you have to have Scorching Ray, here's your justification right here. Boom. Hold Person also makes sense, as Storm could easily use wind or ice to hold you in place while planning a strategy with her team or blasting your other villainous teammates to smithereens. Darkness could easily be a bunch of super thick clouds which Storm could use to blacken a room immediately, and blindness is similarly acceptable. Gust of Wind fits very well and is definitely a great tool to have access to. You can reposition enemies to be closer together for a follow-up AoE, or just blast them straight off cliffs like you've been doing with Thunder Wave. I think at this level, in this spell bracket, my overall favorites are Shatter, Gust of Wind, and Hold Person. But I mentioned a bunch of other good ones. You are welcome to take some of those if you're more interested in those. On your feat levels, which will be 4, 8, and 12, you can bump your charisma up a bit, which will make your spells harder for enemies to resist, or the spell attack rolls will be easier to land. It just makes your spell casting better, and also persuasion, intimidation, deception, stuff like that. Your speech checks are all mostly charisma. So you can bump that up. That'll make you stronger in combat and out of combat, which is one of the really strong things about playing a charisma based character, is that when you buff your main stat, you're also buffing out of combat stuff. So this is really nice to have. Just know that if you're trying to stick with Storm's personality, intimidation is what she would usually use. She's not gonna try deception or persuasion as often as intimidation. She'll kind of just tell you what is gonna happen, and then if that isn't what happens, then you're in a fight with Storm, which is not a good place to be. You can also take some of the cool spellcasting related feats that are available, like Warcaster, which will grant you advantage on concentration saving throws, and also it allows you to use Shocking Grasp as a reaction when an enemy is walking out of range of your character. Just know that taking Warcaster as a feat doesn't actually grant you Shocking Grasp as a cantrip. It will allow you to use it when the target moves out of range of your character, but other than that, you won't have it. So if you want Shocking Grasp all the time, you need to take it as actually one of your cantrip choices. Elemental Adept is another cool option for feats. This one comes in 5 variations: Acid, Cold, Lightning, Fire, and Thunder. After choosing one of these elements, your spells of that element will now ignore target's resistance to that element, and when you deal damage of that type with a spell, if you roll a 1 on one of your damage die, it's going to be counted as a 2 instead. So it says on the feat that you can no longer roll a 1. That does not apparently mean that it re-rolls it if you roll a 1. It just turns 1s into 2s, so it's not nearly as good as you might have thought. This does add a small amount of average overall damage to everything cast from that element, but overcoming enemy resistances is the more important part of the feat, and I think it's the cooler part. You will be allowed to pick another spell at 4th level as well, and at 5th level, your level 3 spells are going to unlock. This represents a pretty substantial jump in power. There's all kinds of great spells that are in this section of spells here. So let's take a look at some of these. The spells Sleet Storm, Lightning Bolt, Grant Flight, and Daylight don't even really need to be argued for, honestly. Those are obvious things that Storm can do. But there are also a few others that you may not have thought would work that I want to point out as well. Haste could be argued by saying Storm uses a tailwind to make her teammates move faster. I honestly think that fits much better for Longstrider than it does for Haste, but I could accept the argument for Haste as well. Much more easily proven is Counterspell. Remember back when we were talking about Storm pulling blowing the air directly out of that guy's freaking lungs? Well, I personally think that covers the functionality of counterspell as well. I don't think there are many spellcasters disciplined enough to continue casting a spell while the air is being actively sucked from their lungs and they are suffocating to death. If you don't buy that as a reason for using counterspell, here's a panel where Storm was fighting against Black Panther and she manipulates the air pressure inside of his inner ears, causing him intense pain and dizziness, basically stun locked him. This is another simple way that she would be able to interrupt your spellcasting process. If all of a sudden it felt like your head was about to explode off your shoulders, you might forget what the heck you're talking about or mispronounce one of your spellcasting words or something like that. And even if you can't justify it to yourself, even if both of these excuses that I've just given you for taking counterspell don't do it for you and you don't think you should take it, take counterspell anyway. It's freaking badass and you're not going to want to miss it. At 6th level, Heart of the Storm will grant you even more AoE damage baked right into your other thunder and lightning spells, and will grant you permanent resistance to thunder and lightning damage from now on. This perfectly fits with Storm's theme, and passive resistance bonuses like this are always nice to have. I'm definitely glad to take this one. You will also automatically gain access to a bunch of relevant spells at this point, so you can respec at Withers and change up the spell choices you've made so far if you've already picked one of the ones you're going to get for free at 6th level. Which spells are those, you ask? Well, let me just tell you. Create or destroy water is what you will use when you need it to rain. You can be inside, outside, in the Underdark, doesn't matter. When Storm needs rain, she makes some. She even makes her own showers and then uses her own wind to dry herself off, which would be friggin' awesome. Coincidentally, your character can use this spell to wash blood and nastiness off of themselves and their allies as well. You're just like Storm. Oh my god. Gust of Wind is awesome for reaching out a bit further than Thunder Wave to knock people around. Sometimes you're just a few steps too far away and a gust of wind is just the spell you need to knock someone off a cliff. Sleet Storm is another very strong spell. This one causes an area of freezing rain to come crashing down, potentially causing spellcasters to lose their focus on whatever spells they were concentrating on. It will also leave a giant patch of ice on the ground, which might cause the casters to slip and fall, which also breaks concentration. This is a very good tool to have and something that fits perfectly into the Storm theme as well. Call Lightning is pretty self-explanatory as to why it belongs here. This and Lightning Bolt are two of the most iconic spells that would fit with Storm's theme. Call Lightning targets a circular area to strike with a bolt of lightning from the sky, hitting all targets in that small area. If you then maintain concentration on the spell, you can recast it each turn without spending any further spell slots for up to 10 turns. This is a very good way to get multiple turns worth of lightning damage out with a single level 3 spell slot being the only cost. And if you're trying to conserve spell slots for some reason, you know a boss fight's coming up, or you're not sure if there's going to be a boss fight, you don't want to go throwing all your spell slots in the trash, this is a great way to conserve some of them while also still putting out respectable lightning damage. It's also very easy to target, and you're going to find multiple occasions where you're going to be able to easily strike 2 or 3 people with this. It won't happen every time, but you'll notice it happening quite a bit. Not a bad spell at all. Lightning Bolt is a totally different thing. This is your character firing a horizontal lightning bolt from their hands in a straight line, which will hit all targets in its path. Because of the fact that this spell casts in a straight line, it requires good positioning in order to use it effectively. But let me tell you, this thing is badass and you're gonna want it. There is almost no feeling like firing off one of these babies into a room and watching 2 or 3 enemies in a row disintegrate right before your very eyeballs. It's the little things in life, you know? At 7th level, you'll gain access to your level 4 spells. Ice Storm is the obvious best choice here, but Confusion is also acceptable if we look back at the sucking oxygen out of your lungs and out of your brain situation from earlier. Lowering the oxygen in a room would definitely cause confusion. For sure. So if you want to take Confusion, you've got a freaking excuse for that one too. At 8th level, you will choose another spell and another feat. Bump your main stats or take one of the cool caster feats that we talked about earlier. Either way, let's continue. 9th level unlocks your level 5 spells, of which Cone of Cold is the easy choice. Blasting a cone of Arctic chill into the room and freezing a bunch of people is something Storm does routinely. This is one of her go-to moves. Cloud Kill could also be imagined as a cloud of toxins that Storm has pulled from the air and concentrated, so this one makes sense as well if you really want it. Hold Monster fits in just like Hold Person did, and if you are willing to suspend some disbelief a little bit, Telekinesis can be imagined as wind and air throwing objects and people around like we mentioned earlier. I know it isn't exactly telekinesis, I know it's not the same thing, but I'm convinced that to an outside observer it would look functionally identical to telekinesis. At 10th level, you will get your final meta magic choice, so make sure to pick a good one here. There's no way in the world to change this choice once it's made. You're locked in forever, unless you go back to Withers and pay him a teeny tiny amount of gold that you can pickpocket right back from him. Other than that though, nothing you can do. This is a joke, by the way, in case anyone's not catching that. It's very easy to change this. If you pick one that you end up not liking, you can go respec and fix whatever options you picked. Not a big deal. At 11th level, your level 6 spells unlock. Chain Lightning is obviously the way to go here for a storm-based build, but Sunbeam could also be argued, depending on the arguer, and don't count out Globe of Invulnerability either way, as here's a panel of Storm making a big ol' force field to protect her teammates. You will also gain the Storm's Fury ability at this level. This is a reaction you can trigger whenever you are struck by a melee attack, and if you do, your attacker will take a bit of thunder damage and potentially be knocked backwards if they fail a save. This can be a strong way to easily put distance between your caster and some enemies who are too close for comfort, and I can totally see Storm blasting someone away right as their weapon makes contact with her. And then finally, at 12th level, you will get to pick one more spell and one more feat. Pick what fits, same advice as before. And voila, ladies and gentlemen, we now have a 12th level Storm Sorceress who can bend air, ice, lightning, and even her enemies themselves to her will. This is not the only way to build Storm in Baldur's Gate 3, however. So now let's take a look at a variation which is mostly the same as what we just covered except for 2 levels. For a different Storm Sorcerer build, you can always take 2 levels of Tempest Cleric with 10 levels of Storm Sorcerer instead of going the full 12 levels of Sorc. If you do decide to go this route, know in advance that you're going to lose access to your level 6 spells. So, Chain Lightning, Sunbeam, and Globe of Invulnerability, the ones we just talked about, are now not going to be available to you through normal means. You can still find items that will allow for the use of these spells, but you won't get to actually choose them on the level up screen. You'll never make it to that level. So that probably seems like a pretty bad deal, because Chain Lightning is pretty sweet and it fits perfectly in the build, so what do we have to gain to justify losing the perfect spell for the build? Well, let's take a look. 2 levels in Tempest Cleric will get you the Destructive Wrath ability. This is a Channel Divinity action, which is a cleric class feature, much like the Sorcerer's meta magic. You will be able to use this once per day when you are dealing lightning or thunder damage. It's going to prompt you, say, hey, do you want to use this on this attack, on this spell? You're going to either choose yes or no. If you decide to use Destructive Wrath on that spell, it will instantly guarantee that that particular spell deals its maximum possible damage. To make that more clear, let's use an example with simple numbers. Call Lightning has a damage range of 3 to 30 per target that it strikes. Let's imagine a situation, like I said earlier, where we cast Call Lightning and it's going to strike 3 targets. This is not going to happen every time, but it is not out of the ordinary, and you will see situations like this. The total damage range for this spell would be 9 to 90. Because it's 3 targets and each one of them will be taking 3 to 30. So if we are insanely unlucky, we could cast this spell and strike 3 targets with a whopping 3 damage each for a total of 9 damage. It most likely will not happen that way, as the average damage of the spell is much higher than that, but it could happen that way is what I'm saying. That is where Destructive Wrath comes into play. If you trigger it on that same exact spell cast in that same situation, hitting those same 3 targets, you will do a guaranteed 90 damage, as each target will receive the maximum 30 apiece. You can already see how busted this would be, but it gets even crazier when you take vulnerability into account. If you have a way to get your targets wet, you will double the amount of lightning and cold damage that they take for the duration. This condition will be important for any storm-themed build, and you can see here that it's a tactic she often employs in the comics as well. You can have another caster use Create Water to make it rain, or Storm herself can use Quicken spell with meta magic to make it rain, get the targets wet, and then cast another spell with your action. You can even have one of your other party members use one of their actions to throw a jug of water at the enemies. It'll smash on them, get them all wet, and then you can have Storm just nuke into that group of wet targets. It really doesn't matter how you get them wet. What matters is that now, instead of 3 to 30 damage per target, Call Lightning will hit those wet targets for 6 to 60 damage, because vulnerability doubles the damage you take from that form of damage. And I think you can probably see where we're going with this. Same 3 targets, same spell, but now they're all wet. Destructive Wrath gets used, and for the cost of a level 3 spell slot, a Channel Divinity charge, and a reaction, you will deal a guaranteed 180 damage in a single cast. Boom. It is important to note, for the purposes of party synergy and just to inform you properly, when you get targets wet, they will get resistance to fire damage on top of the vulnerability to cold and lightning damage. It makes sense. It's a bit harder to burn somebody if they're soaking wet when you try it. Trust me. Now, it's going to be up to you whether or not you want to give up Chain Lightning to go this route, but what if I told you that you don't have to? Let's look at one more variation of this build that might end up giving us the best of both worlds. If we are willing to drop one more Sorcerer level and replace it with a Wizard level, a couple of things happen. Firstly, this is going to mean that your Sorcerer level maxes out at level 9, which means you will not get the Sorcerer level 10, which is where you got your 4th meta magic choice, so you're going to lose that. Personally, I think it's worth it, because what you get with a single level of Wizard in Baldur's Gate 3 is the ability to learn spells from scrolls that you find on your adventure. Wizards can learn an absolutely absurd amount of powerful spells this way, including things like Chain Lightning and Globe of Invulnerability. So as you probably already worked out, taking this one level of Wizard grants you access to pretty much all of the things that we lost by taking those 2 levels of Cleric earlier. Now we have the guaranteed Big Boom spell once per day, and we have access to pretty much every spell in the universe. And yes, you can use that Big Boom spell with Chain Lightning, and it's friggin' sick when you do that. It's awesome. You used to be able to twin cast Chain Lightnings like that. Unfortunately, you can't do that anymore, but let me just tell you, it was absolutely disgusting. Twin casting fully max damage Chain Lightnings into a room, you would annihilate every single living, breathing creature in the room in 2 milliseconds flat. It was so awesome. You're still almost that strong. Don't think that it's like, oh, back in my day. It was back in my day. It was more badass. But let me just tell you right now, Storm Sorcerers, nothing to freaking freaking sneeze at today either. They're busted. So strong. We've gone over 3 variations. I could sit here and go over little teeny tiny changes and variations of this build literally all day long. And trust me, I would love to, but instead of that, I'm gonna go start working on the next video for you guys. This one's gonna be about Magic, who is also from the X-Men comics. So make sure to keep an eye out for that video, and please let me know in the comments who else you want to see builds for, or shout out your own build ideas for everyone to use, and I may end up featuring some of them in future videos. If you guys have some really cool build ideas, I'll definitely shout them out. Thank all you guys for watching the video, and I want to give an extra special thanks to my channel members and those of you who have been supporting me on Patreon and Ko-fi. I greatly appreciate you guys. More than you know, trust me, I appreciate it a lot. If you want to join the Discord, there's a link to that down in the description. We like to nerd out about different character builds, different RPG stuff, comic book stuff, just whatever, video game related junk. Feel free, the more the merrier. There's going to be a link to that in the description. If you guys want to become supporters of the channel, there are also links for that stuff down in the description. But I'm going to go ahead and cut it right here and stop talking y'all's ear off. As always, travelers, I am glad you got to see me. Do your best to stay alive out there. Until next time, see ya.